It was late July of 2019 when Emily Parker and David Miller, a couple in their early 30s from Seattle, packed their camping gear for what was supposed to be a short weekend escape. They had always been drawn to the beauty of the Pacific Northwest, and the Olympic National Forest had been on their list for months. Known for its moss-draped trees, fog-covered trails, and remote campsites, the area promised peace, adventure, and a break from the noise of city life. The couple was last seen by neighbors smiling as they loaded their car, unaware that this simple trip would be their last. When they arrived at the trailhead, they texted family to say they'd reached safely, and planned to camp near Lake Crescent. That was the final contact anyone ever had from them. For the next 2 days, their phones went silent. When Monday rolled around, Emily didn't show up for her nursing shift, and David missed his tech job in downtown Seattle. Both were considered highly responsible, the kind of people who never just disappeared without a word. Their families knew immediately that something was wrong. Authorities launched a search, starting at the trailhead, where the couple's silver Subaru was found neatly parked. The car doors were locked, the keys missing, but strangely, the vehicle showed no signs of damage or forced entry. The discovery raised unsettling questions. If they had been attacked, why leave the car untouched? If they had left willingly, why not drive? Investigators pressed forward, searching the surrounding forest for answers. Deep in the woods, rangers came across their tent. It was fully set up, with sleeping bags rolled out and a lantern placed carefully inside. A small campfire ring of stone still held the faint scent of ash, suggesting it had been used only days before. Food supplies were left behind, as though the couple had stepped away for just a few minutes. Yet there were no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, and no footprints leading away from the site. To the searchers, it was as though Emily and David had simply evaporated into the thick Washington wilderness. The more investigators examined the scene, the stranger it became. The campsite gave off an eerie feeling of being frozen in time, untouched, silent, and abandoned in a way that didn't make sense. Even seasoned search and rescue members admitted something felt wrong. One officer later recalled, "I've seen people get lost before, but this wasn't that. This was different. It was too clean, too perfect." When the alarm was first raised, dozens of volunteers, park rangers and search and rescue teams quickly mobilized. Helicopters swept low over the towering pines, while ground teams with search dogs combed through thickets, streams, and rocky ridges. The Olympic National Forest is over 600 thousand acres of dense wilderness, and searching it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Every hour felt crucial. Families held on to hope that Emily and David had simply wandered off trail and were waiting to be found. But as the hours turned to days, and days into weeks, unease grew heavy in the air. The search dogs initially picked up a faint trail, leading away from the campsite, winding deeper into the forest. Handlers followed the scent eagerly, but it ended abruptly at the edge of a fast-moving stream. No footprints, no drag marks, no personal items, nothing. Investigators feared the couple may have fallen into the water and drowned, their bodies swept away by the current. Yet extensive sweeps downstream turned up empty. Not even a shoe, a scrap of clothing, or a single clue drifted to the surface. It was as though the forest itself had swallowed them whole. For the families, every passing day was agony. Emily's parents walked with the search teams, calling her name into the fog. David's younger brother retraced parts of the trail, refusing to give up. Volunteers reported hearing strange echoes in the woods. Some swore they heard a woman's faint voice, though when they followed the sound, it always led to nothing but silence. Even the search crews began whispering among themselves that the forest felt different, heavier, as if it didn't want to give anything back. As the investigation deepened, detectives started to rule out simple accidents. Emily and David were experienced hikers, careful, well-prepared, and familiar with wilderness safety. Friends insisted they weren't reckless and wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks. The lack of any tracks, gear, or signs of wildlife attack puzzled experts. Normally, when someone goes missing in the wilderness, there are at least small pieces left behind, shredded fabric, broken branches, even animal traces. But here, everything was eerily pristine. The mystery soon attracted media attention, pulling in reporters who crowded at the trailhead, eager to cover the unfolding story. National outlets ran headlines about the vanishing couple of Olympic Forest, comparing it to other unsolved disappearances in America's wilderness. The pressure on authorities mounted, but the harder they searched, the less they found. It became one of the largest, most exhaustive searches in Washington's history. Yet after weeks of relentless effort, there was no sign of Emily and David. The forest remained silent, offering no answers. Long before Emily and David's disappearance, the Olympic National Forest carried with it a shadowy reputation. stretching across vast miles of mossy wilderness. It was the kind of place that felt alive, where the wind carried whispers and the silence pressed too heavy on the ears. Locals often warned outsiders that the forest had a memory, keeping secrets buried within its tangled roots. Though law enforcement dismissed such claims, many families in nearby towns had grown up hearing unsettling tales of people who went into those woods and never came back. One of the most persistent legends was of the Watcher in the woods. According to old logging families, people would sometimes feel as though someone was following them, their footsteps echoing faintly behind even when no one was there. Campers reported seeing a tall shadow lingering between the trees, too large to be an animal, too silent to be a man. Some described it as a figure that would move only when you weren't looking directly at it, always just at the edge of vision, waiting. Rangers dismissed these accounts as paranoia brought on by fatigue, but the stories never faded. Stranger still were reports of voices. Hikers swore they had heard loved ones calling their names, only to realize they were alone. Some said the voices would lure them off the trail, pulling them deeper into the forest until they were hopelessly disoriented. A few managed to make it back, shaken and pale, insisting something intelligent was behind it, something that knew them. Stories circulated in small, town diners about hunters who followed those phantom voices and were never seen again. For locals, it was more than folklore, it was a warning. Adding to the unease were the documented disappearances stretching back decades. Old newspaper clippings told of hikers, hunters, and campers vanishing in eerily similar circumstances. No struggle, no evidence, no remains. Families who had lost loved ones spoke quietly of patterns, pointing to the same remote regions where Emily and David had camped. Online forums began linking these vanishings together, suggesting there was more than coincidence at play. The forest, they claimed, was hiding something, and Emily and David had become the latest victims of its secrets. The authorities, of course, avoided feeding into superstition. Publicly, they cited accidents, animal attacks, or simply getting lost in a vast wilderness. But off the record, even seasoned rangers admitted there were places in those woods they refused to go alone. Some search and rescue members later confessed to a feeling of being watched during the operation, the sense that the forest itself was closing in on them. For the families of Emily and David, these whispers only deepened the horror. If the forest had already taken others, what chance had their loved ones ever stood? Several months after the official search had been called off, a lone hiker stumbled upon something unusual deep inside the Olympic forest. He reported finding a torn piece of fabric caught on the jagged bark of a fallen branch. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than weathered cloth left behind by another camper. But when investigators analyzed it, the results were chilling. The material matched the exact shirt Emily had been wearing on the day she disappeared. For her family, it was a small confirmation that she had indeed gone deeper into the woods. But it also begged the question, why hadn't this piece been discovered during the exhaustive earlier searches? Investigators grew uneasy when they realized the location of the fabric had already been combed during the first wave of the search operation. Search dogs, thermal imaging, and dozens of volunteers had passed through the area, yet at the time, no evidence had been found. This suggested one disturbing possibility. Either the search teams had somehow missed it entirely, or worse, someone had placed it there afterward. The second option sent shivers down the spines of everyone involved. Was someone deliberately planting clues to confuse investigators? Not long after, another unsettling discovery was made. A local hunter found a rusted flashlight wedged between rocks near a creek bed. It was water damaged, its batteries corroded, but when tested, forensic experts confirmed it bore faint fingerprints matching David. Strangely, this creek was miles from the couple's campsite, and well outside the radius where they were believed to have traveled. It raised troubling questions. Had the couple been forced to move against their will? Were they running from something? Or had someone carried their belongings to this remote spot intentionally? Each new clue only deepened the mystery, rather than solving it. The items were scattered, inconsistent, and appeared in places that didn't align with the official search grid. Investigators began to privately suspect foul play, but without bodies, without a weapon, and without a clear trail, the case remained a haunting puzzle. The forest seemed to mock their efforts, offering fragments of truth, but never the whole story. For every item found, 10 new questions emerged, leaving detectives frustrated and families tormented. By this point, the community around the Olympic forest was divided. Some believed the clues proved the couple had been stalked by a human predator, who knew the terrain well enough to mislead investigators. Others insisted the forest itself was somehow shifting the evidence, playing tricks, or even hiding the couple from discovery. Online forums lit up with conspiracy theories, ranging from serial killers to supernatural forces, and the story of Emily and David began to take on an eerie life of its own. The evidence was real, but its meaning remained maddeningly out of reach. By the time 2 years had passed, the once intense search for Emily and David had faded into the background. What began as headline news slowly drifted into obscurity as newer tragedies and stories dominated the media cycle. For their families, this was the most painful reality of all. Watching the world move on while they remained trapped in the same nightmare. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays came and went, each one marked by an empty seat and unanswered questions. For the Parkers and the Millers, life had become an endless limbo. Detectives, stretched thin with other cases, admitted there was little more they could do. Officially, the disappearance was still under investigation, but behind closed doors, the case files gathered dust. Leads had dried up, tips had gone cold, and no new evidence surfaced. A sense of resignation began to creep into the authorities, voices whenever the families called for updates. Even among the search and rescue teams, the couple's case was referred to as one of those unsolved forest mysteries, destined to remain unanswered. Yet, in the towns surrounding the Olympic National Forest, the story refused to die completely. Locals still whispered about Emily and David whenever new campers came through. They warned travelers about the strange silence that could fall over the forest without warning, about the shadowy figure some swore they had glimpsed, and about the voices that lured hikers off the path. For many, the couple's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was further proof of the forest's dark reputation, a place where the living could vanish without a trace. Online, small communities of true crime followers and paranormal enthusiasts kept the mystery alive. Reddit threads, YouTube channels, and obscure blogs revisited the case, debating every scrap of evidence. Some believed a hidden predator still roamed the forest, while others leaned into theories about the supernatural. The families often avoided these discussions, but sometimes, late at night, they found themselves reading the posts, desperate for any explanation, even the most far-fetched ones. It was a cruel reflection of how far they were willing to go for answers. By now, the pain of uncertainty had hardened into something else: quiet endurance. Emily's parents continued to leave flowers at the trailhead every year, a ritual of remembrance. David's brother kept a box of newspaper clippings and search maps under his bed, unable to let go. For the outside world, Emily and David had become just 2 names on a long list of unsolved wilderness vanishings. But for those who loved them, time had not dulled the ache, it had only deepened the wound. The silence of the forest had swallowed the truth, and it seemed determined never to give it back. It wasn't until the summer of 2023, 4 long years after Emily and David first vanished, that the forest finally gave up a fragment of its secret. A crew of loggers was working in a remote and seldom touched section of the Olympic National Forest, when one of them noticed something odd beneath a cluster of stones. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shallow mound of earth, disturbed by rain and erosion. But as the workers moved closer, the faint outline of what seemed to be a human bone caught their attention. Horrified, they stopped their work immediately and alerted authorities. When investigators arrived, they carefully unearthed the site. Beneath the rocks and soil lay a shallow pit, just deep enough to conceal what was inside. The discovery was grim: skeletal remains belonging to 2 individuals. Though time and the elements had worn them down, enough evidence remained to suggest that these were not accidental deaths. Their hands were bound with rope, brittle from decay but still unmistakable. And the positioning of the bodies suggested they had not been laid to rest with care, but rather discarded with urgency, almost as though someone had wanted them hidden quickly. DNA testing confirmed what both families had feared but had clung desperately against for years. It was Emily and David. The confirmation brought both relief and devastation. At last, there was proof, a tangible answer to the question that had haunted everyone since 2019. But with this grim revelation came even darker questions: who had bound them? Why had they been buried in such a crude, hurried fashion? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why here, in an area miles from their original campsite? Yet the bones weren't the only thing found in the pit. Tucked beside the remains, wrapped tightly in a layer of plastic, was an object that stunned investigators. A small, battered camcorder. Its casing was cracked, and its lens was caked with dirt and rust, but it was unmistakably a recording device. Whoever had buried Emily and David had either overlooked it or left it intentionally. The discovery of the camcorder shifted the case from a cold trail to a chilling new direction. This was not just evidence of their deaths. This was potentially a record of their final hours. When news of the discovery broke, it reignited public interest in the case overnight. Reporters swarmed the region, headlines screamed about the buried camcorder mystery, and families once again found themselves in the blinding spotlight of national attention. For authorities, however, the excitement was tempered by dread. They now had answers, but the evidence suggested something far more sinister than an ordinary disappearance. And if the camcorder's footage could be salvaged, it might reveal a truth darker than anyone was prepared to confront. The camcorder, though weathered by years underground, still held a memory card inside. Investigators immediately sent it to a specialized forensic lab capable of recovering data from heavily damaged devices. Weeks passed as technicians painstakingly extracted what they could. Against all odds, fragments of video files survived. When law enforcement finally sat down to review the recovered footage, what they saw left them shaken to the core. Even seasoned detectives, hardened by years of disturbing cases, admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. The first clips showed Emily and David sitting inside their tent, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Their faces were pale, eyes darting toward the flap of the tent as though something, or someone, was circling outside. In one clip, David whispered that he kept hearing footsteps around the campsite, but whenever he checked, nothing was there. Emily, visibly trembling, insisted she had heard a man's voice calling her name from the woods, though no one ever appeared. These weren't carefree campers documenting their trip, they were terrified, and the fear in their voices was unmistakable. As the footage continued, the situation escalated. The camera, propped up awkwardly, captured Emily jolting awake in the middle of the night, insisting that something had brushed against the tent. David rushed outside with a flashlight, but the beam illuminated only thick trees and empty darkness. Yet on the recording, faint noises could be heard in the distance, slow, deliberate cracking sounds, as though someone was stepping on branches just out of sight. Each time David's light swung in that direction, the sounds stopped abruptly. The final minutes of the footage were the most harrowing. The camera shook violently, as if clutched in panic. Emily could be heard sobbing, while David shouted frantically for her to run. A shadow, large, indistinct, but undeniably human-like, flashed across the screen for only a fraction of a second before chaos erupted. The camera tumbled to the ground, capturing only muffled screams, heavy breathing, and the frantic rustle of movement in the underbrush. Then, without warning, the recording cut to static. Those last distorted seconds became the only known record of Emily and David's final moments alive. Authorities refused to release the full footage to the public, citing its disturbing content and the ongoing investigation. However, fragments of the description leaked through insiders, fueling a storm of speculation. Was the figure in the video a person stalking the couple through the forest? Or was it something far stranger, something that defied explanation? To this day, the footage remains locked away in evidence, but the chilling details that escaped were enough to ensure Emily and David's story would never be forgotten, and that the forest where they vanished would forever carry a new layer of dread. And so, the tragic case of Emily and David remains suspended between truth and legend. Their bodies were found, their final moments captured, but the one question that matters most, the who, or the what, that stalked them, still has no answer. The forest offered fragments of the story, just enough to torment, but never enough to explain. Even now, hikers in the Olympic National Forest claim to feel watched, to hear faint voices in the wind, or to see shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Whether it was a human predator, a hidden secret of the wilderness, or something far older and darker that claimed the couple, no one can say for sure. What is certain is this: Emily and David went into the forest as two young people seeking peace and adventure, and what they found instead was something unspeakable. The camera may have captured their fear, but the true face of what haunted them was never revealed. Some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, and this one may forever be among them. So the next time you venture deep into the woods, remember their story. Because sometimes, the silence isn't empty, it's listening.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.